Emily Richardson was born in 1990, in the heart of Austin, Texas. Raised in a middle-class family with a history teacher for a father and a nurse for a mother, she had always been an ambitious child. The quiet suburbs of Austin provided a sense of comfort and stability, yet Emily's world was shattered when her parents divorced when she was just 14. The pain of their separation left scars deeper than she ever let on, and from that moment on, a fierce resolve to build her own perfect family took root within her. She threw herself into her studies, using academic success as a way to cope with the overwhelming sense of betrayal that came from the dissolution of her family. Throughout her high school years, Emily excelled in every subject, but it was in communication and psychology where she truly thrived. She saw people, saw their thoughts, their motives, before they ever spoke. It was a skill that earned her a scholarship to the University of Texas, where she majored in communication and minored in psychology. It was here, amidst the sprawling campus and the late-night study sessions, that she met James. James Richardson was everything Emily had never had in a man: confident, polished, and ambitious. He was a senior in business administration, already on the path to becoming a successful corporate consultant. Their meeting at a university mixer felt almost fated. He was captivated by her sharp wit, her quiet strength, and the warmth of her smile. Emily, on the other hand, was drawn to his drive, his energy, and the way he seemed to carry the world with ease. They were inseparable from the moment they met, their relationship blossoming with the kind of certainty that felt like a promise. By the time Emily graduated, they were already discussing marriage. It felt right. She had never felt more secure, more in love. The wedding was everything she had dreamed of, a beautiful ceremony held in a picturesque chapel in Austin, surrounded by friends, family, and the life they had built together. Emily thought she had it all: love, a future, a dream coming true. After their wedding, they settled into a charming home in one of Austin's most desirable neighborhoods. Emily quickly climbed the ranks in her career, securing a position as a marketing executive at one of the city's top advertising firms. At 30, she was already making a name for herself in the competitive world of corporate marketing. She had everything she had ever wanted: a successful career, a loving husband, and the dream of someday becoming a mother. Yet, as the years passed, their dream of having children began to unravel. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't seem to conceive. The strain of infertility took its toll on their marriage, but Emily clung to the hope that their bond could weather any storm. The couple grew closer in some ways, but more distant in others. James's work as a management consultant required frequent, often long business trips, leaving Emily alone to navigate the quiet nights. At first, she found comfort in her routine: work, yoga, volunteer work at a local animal shelter. But as the years wore on, the emptiness of their unfilled home grew harder to ignore. Even when James was home, something had shifted. The laughter that once filled their evenings seemed quieter, the spark between them flickering just a little too faintly. Emily convinced herself that it was just the weight of their struggles: infertility, work pressures, the demands of adulthood. She brushed off the subtle changes in James's behavior: the increasing number of business trips, the late-night phone calls, the distracted way he looked at his phone even when they were supposed to be spending time together. But then, something happened, something small, almost insignificant, yet it planted a seed of doubt in Emily's heart. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the day that had always been so important to James, he forgot. Completely. He was away on another business trip, and he didn't even call until late in the evening. When Emily reminded him, he apologized, but there was something in his tone, something distant, that made her wonder. Was it just the pressures of work? Or was there something more to it? Little did she know, this tiny crack in their perfect life would soon open into a chasm of secrets and lies that would forever change everything. The fall semester of Emily's sophomore year at the University of Texas brought more than just the excitement of another academic year. It brought James. It was at a university mixer, one of those standard events where students gather to meet new people and make connections. Emily had always been reserved, preferring quiet nights spent studying or reading over socializing, but something about the event felt different that night. Perhaps it was the lingering autumn chill in the air, or maybe it was fate knocking on her door. As she walked into the crowded hall, she noticed him immediately. James stood across the room, laughing with a small group of his friends, but even from a distance, Emily couldn't help but be drawn to him. He had that rare combination of confidence and charm, a man who could command a room with a glance and yet made everyone feel as though they were the most important person in the world. His smile was warm, genuine, a stark contrast to the self-assured aura that radiated from him. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a split second, Emily felt her heart skip a beat. It was as if the universe had arranged their meeting, because just moments later, he approached her. "Hi, I'm James," he said with that smile that seemed to melt the space between them. Emily introduced herself, her voice a bit shaky but excited all the same. They talked for what seemed like hours, the words flowing easily between them, their connection undeniable. They talked about their majors, their goals, their dreams, and before long, Emily found herself laughing more than she had in a long time. James was everything Emily had ever wanted in a partner: intelligent, driven, and incredibly charismatic. He told her about his ambitions to work in business consulting, his dream of making it to the top of the corporate ladder. Emily, on the other hand, shared her passion for communication and psychology, her desire to understand people and the intricacies of human behavior. They clicked immediately, and their conversations flowed like they had known each other for years. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew, turning into something far more intense and exciting. James was always thoughtful, sending Emily small texts throughout the day, checking in to see how her classes were going or asking about her weekend plans. There was a certain excitement that ran through every moment they spent together, a spark that neither of them could ignore. For Emily, it was like the world had finally given her everything she had ever hoped for, a partner who understood her, who made her feel seen and valued. The more time they spent together, the deeper Emily's feelings grew. She admired James for his ambition, for the way he spoke so confidently about his future. But what truly captivated her was the way he made her feel, like she mattered, like she was the only one in the room that mattered. The way he listened when she spoke, the way he looked at her as if she was the most beautiful woman in the world, it was a feeling Emily had never experienced before, and she was hooked. By the end of their junior year, Emily and James were inseparable. They spent nearly every moment together, attending parties, cooking dinners, and traveling whenever they could. They even started planning their future together: marriage, children, a house, a life. Emily couldn't imagine a future without James by her side. He was her dream come true, the partner she had been waiting for. The proposal came during their senior year, just months before graduation. James took Emily on a weekend getaway to Lake Travis, a beautiful spot just outside Austin. As they walked along the shore at sunset, James stopped, turned to her, and, with that same warm smile, asked her to be his forever. Emily, her heart racing, said yes before he could even finish the question. It was the happiest moment of her life, a dream realized, and she couldn't wait to start the next chapter with James. The wedding came just 2 months after graduation. It was everything Emily had imagined it would be, a beautiful ceremony held in a charming chapel in the heart of Austin, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The reception was filled with laughter, music, and dancing, and Emily couldn't help but feel as if this was the beginning of something perfect. Her father walked her down the aisle, and when she reached James, he took her hands in his eyes full of love and promise. In that moment, Emily was certain, this was the life she had always dreamed of. This was the man she would spend the rest of her life with. As they exchanged vows, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over her. The journey they had started together in college was now solidified with the promise of forever. They were a team, a unit, ready to take on the world together. After all, what could go wrong when you had everything: love, ambition, and a shared dream? But little did Emily know, this perfect beginning would soon unravel in ways she never could have anticipated. Behind the smiles and the vows, James carried secrets that would tear apart everything they had built. And as the days and years passed, those secrets would come to light, turning Emily's world upside down. But at that moment, standing next to James, surrounded by the people they loved, Emily believed she was living in the fairy tale she had always dreamed of. For now, everything was perfect. Or so she thought. The first few years of marriage between Emily and James were, by all accounts, blissful. They had built a life that many envied, comfortable, stable, filled with love and ambition. Their new home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Austin was everything they had dreamed of. A cozy, 4-bedroom house that they spent weekends renovating, slowly making it their own. They hosted dinner parties for friends, attended charity galas, and spent lazy weekends exploring local farmers' markets or relaxing on their back porch, glass of wine in hand. It was everything Emily had ever wanted, a family, home, and a life full of potential. By 2015, Emily was a rising star in the marketing world. She had become a senior marketing executive at a prominent firm, and her career was thriving. James, on the other hand, was a successful management consultant, traveling often for business. His job was demanding, requiring him to be away from home for days at a time, sometimes even weeks. At first, Emily found solace in the space his absences gave her. She focused on her own career, attended yoga classes, and volunteered at the local animal shelter. But as time passed, the quiet moments at home began to feel more like isolation than peace. Their relationship had always been founded on communication, talking late into the night, sharing their thoughts, dreams, and even their fears. But as James's career took off, their conversations became fewer and fewer. His phone calls from the road grew shorter, his texts more impersonal. Emily began to notice a subtle shift in the way he interacted with her. The warmth and attentiveness that once defined their relationship seemed to fade with each passing month. At first, she chalked it up to the stress of his job. Business trips were demanding, and the pressure of constant travel and client meetings must have worn him thin. She tried to be understanding, pouring her energy into work and the occasional weekend getaway to distract herself. But as the months went by, the cracks began to show more clearly. James would return home from his trips, but he was often distracted. His attention was always divided, his mind seemed elsewhere, lost in something invisible to her. Emily would catch him looking at his phone during dinner, stepping away to take calls in another room, or even checking his emails at odd hours in the night. There were subtle signs that things were not as they seemed, but Emily convinced herself it was just the pressures of work taking its toll on him. She didn't want to overthink it. After all, he was always so loving when he was home, even if those moments were becoming fewer and further between. One evening, as James sat on the couch flipping through a magazine, his phone buzzed on the coffee table beside him. Emily, passing by, caught a glimpse of the message notification. It was from a name she didn't recognize, Jen. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly brushed the feeling aside, telling herself it was nothing. He had a lot of colleagues and clients. But a part of her couldn't shake the thought. She didn't want to be paranoid. Yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. The first true sign that something was wrong came on their 10th wedding anniversary, a date that had always been significant to both of them. James had always been the romantic type, making sure to mark every milestone in their relationship with thoughtful gifts and grand gestures. But this year, it was different. He had completely forgotten. Emily, shocked and hurt, didn't know how to process it. James was away on a business trip, and he didn't even call her until late in the evening. When she reminded him of their anniversary, his voice was apologetic, but distant. His usual enthusiasm was gone, replaced by an air of distraction. He promised to make it up to her, but it didn't feel like a simple oversight. It felt like something more, a quiet indication that his mind, his heart, was elsewhere. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of confusion and frustration. Emily tried to brush it off, to believe it was nothing. But deep inside, she could feel something shifting. She began to pay closer attention to his behavior. The texts and phone calls with Jen became more frequent. She noticed him receiving late-night calls, whispering into the phone, his back turned to her, as if he were hiding something. The woman's name kept popping up, always in private moments when Emily wasn't around. The cracks in the facade of their perfect life were growing larger, and Emily couldn't ignore them any longer. One evening, after a particularly long business trip, James returned home late. He was tired, distant, his usual warmth absent. Emily sat on the couch, waiting for him to settle in, but as he entered the room, he barely acknowledged her. Instead, he went straight to his phone. Emily watched him for a moment, her mind racing. She tried to make small talk, but he seemed more focused on his device than on her. She felt invisible. It was in that moment that the truth began to set in. Something was terribly wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. As the weeks passed, Emily's unease grew. She found herself questioning everything. The once carefree and loving relationship they had was now tainted with doubt. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain: the man she married was slipping away from her. The man she thought she knew, the man who had once been so attentive, so in love with her, was now a stranger. The final straw came one cold November night when Emily came home from work earlier than expected. She entered their home quietly, only to find James in the middle of a phone call in their bedroom, his voice low and strained. When he saw her standing at the doorway, his face froze, and the color drained from his cheeks. He quickly ended the call, but Emily had already heard enough. Her heart sank as she realized this wasn't just work stress or a passing phase. This was something else, something deeper, something that threatened to shatter everything they had built. The perfect life she had once dreamed of, the life she had worked so hard to create with James, was crumbling before her eyes. Emily stood there, frozen, as the weight of her realization sank in. She had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And so, the investigation began. Emily didn't know it yet, but this moment, the moment she decided to dig deeper into the man she thought she knew, was the point of no return. What she would uncover in the days that followed would change her life forever. It was a quiet afternoon in the spring of 2018 when Emily's life took a turn she never could have anticipated. The skies over Austin were gray, the clouds hanging low, threatening rain, but it wasn't the weather that had Emily feeling uneasy. It was the feeling of restlessness that had been gnawing at her for months. Her suspicions about James, about the subtle cracks that had appeared in their once perfect marriage, had been growing more insistent. She'd been ignoring the whispers in her mind, trying to convince herself that it was just stress, just work, just life. But the nagging feeling remained, always just beneath the surface. That afternoon, Emily had taken a half-day off work, something rare for her. She had planned to get ahead on some projects at home, but she found herself distracted, unable to focus. There was a particular serving platter she wanted to use for a dinner party they were hosting that weekend. It was in the guest room closet, buried beneath boxes of old books and forgotten knickknacks. Emily had never spent much time in that closet before, but today, she found herself opening it, hoping to find the platter and move on. As she reached into the back of the closet, her hand brushed against a cardboard box that wasn't quite where she'd left it. It was smaller than the others, hidden behind old blankets and a stack of books, tucked in a way that made it seem out of place. Curiosity gnawed at her as she knelt down and pulled it from the corner. The box was heavier than it looked, and when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, she found a collection of items that made her stomach drop. There was a second cell phone, the kind that James had never mentioned. A stack of Father's Day cards, all addressed to Daddy, in a child's handwriting, ones that Emily didn't recognize. And several photos of James with a woman and 2 children. His arms were wrapped around the woman, a brunette with bright eyes and a smile that seemed as natural as his. The children, one boy and one girl, looked so happy, so carefree. They couldn't have been older than 5 and 7. In one of the pictures, James was smiling widely, holding the little boy on his shoulders as the girl laughed beside them. It was a scene that could have been taken from a family album, except this wasn't their family. Her hands trembled as she picked up the photos. The background of several shots looked familiar, a house, not a hotel room or vacation spot. It was a home, but not the one Emily had shared with James. As she turned the pictures over, her mind raced. She had never seen these children before, never seen this woman. The last picture was the most recent, taken only a year ago, with the date scrawled across the back, Father's Day 2017. Emily's breath caught in her chest. She could feel her pulse thudding in her ears. Her stomach churned as the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was piecing together began to fall into place. The gut feeling she had been suppressing for so long, her suspicions, were suddenly confirmed. James had another family. Her vision blurred as she dropped the photos back into the box, her heart hammering against her ribs. She picked up the second cell phone with shaky hands and turned it on, her fingers moving almost mechanically. The phone buzzed to life, its screen lit up with dozens of text messages between James and a woman named Jennifer. The messages were filled with endearments, casual references to everyday life, school plays, doctor's appointments, family vacations. It was like reading a diary of a life that had nothing to do with Emily. But it was James's life. His other life. As she scrolled through the messages, each one felt like a knife to her heart. The images she had just seen, the words now on the screen, pieced together a secret world that James had been hiding from her. He had built an entire family, one she knew nothing about, and he had been living a double life. All these years, while she had been building their life together, he had been dividing his time, splitting his loyalty, and betraying her trust. Emily sat there, in the dark silence of their guest room, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her like a ton of bricks. She felt sick, her mind reeling. She turned her attention to the woman, Jennifer Lawrence, as her name appeared in the messages. Emily quickly pulled up Jennifer's social media profile, her heart racing as she clicked through. Most of the profile was private, but enough was visible to confirm Emily's worst fears. The photos of Jennifer and her children, the smiling family outings, the quiet moments of domestic life, it was all there. Jennifer and the kids lived in Columbus, Ohio, while James had always told Emily he was in town for business when he traveled there. The final blow came when Emily discovered Jennifer's recent posts about her family, always phrased carefully to avoid direct mention of James, but it was clear, Jennifer was James's other family. Emily's head spun as the reality of the situation fully sank in. She had spent years believing that her marriage was one of mutual love and trust. But it had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion that James had been living behind the facade of their perfect life. With a shaky breath, Emily turned back to the second phone. She went through more messages, and as she did, she found something else, a separate bank account that James had never mentioned. A bank account with regular transfers to an account in Jennifer's name. More text messages followed, references to business expenses that James had always explained away, but now they were revealed for what they truly were, financial support for his second family. The tears started to fall then, though she didn't even know when they began. Emily's world, the world she had so carefully constructed in her mind, crumbled into a heap of broken promises and shattered trust. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process it all. The man she loved, the man she had shared her life with, had been lying to her for years. But now, the truth was in front of her, undeniable and raw. The dream of a perfect family she had built with James had turned into a nightmare. Her heart ached, her mind screamed for answers, but all she had was a trail of lies that led to nowhere but destruction. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady, her hand still trembling as she placed the phone and the box of photos back in the closet. The dinner party they had planned for the weekend, everything, seemed meaningless now. Emily was left in a storm of emotions: betrayal, anger, confusion. The questions flooded her mind, but one stood out above all the others: what was she supposed to do now? The discovery had only just begun. And what came next would alter the course of her life forever. Emily could barely process what she had discovered. The photos, the second phone, the messages between James and Jennifer, everything seemed like a cruel, twisted dream. Her hand still shook as she set the phone down, her heart hammering in her chest. The reality of what she had just uncovered felt like a punch to the gut, a betrayal so profound that it left her breathless. She had always known that something was off, but never in her wildest imagination had she expected this. For days, Emily moved in a daze. She barely ate, barely slept. Her once vibrant home felt cold, sterile, like a shell of the life she had built with James. The silence in their house was deafening. She no longer felt safe in the place that had once been her sanctuary. Every room felt tainted by the truth she now knew. Emily's mind raced as she tried to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster who had been hiding secrets from her for years. It wasn't long before the intense emotional turmoil gave way to a gnawing need for answers. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't let this go. James had built a second life, a life that had existed right under her nose, and she had to know everything about it. But as much as her instincts screamed at her to confront him, to throw everything she had in his face, another part of her held back. The doubt that had crept into her heart earlier now clung to her thoughts. Would confronting James immediately make things worse? What if there was something else she was missing? Emily felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the psychological toll of the discovery threatening to consume her. Her every waking moment became an obsession. She couldn't focus on her work, couldn't concentrate on anything. All she could think about was James and Jennifer, the lies, the deceit, and the children she had never known existed. She couldn't escape it, couldn't stop herself from replaying the images of James with that woman and those children. It felt like a deep wound, one that wouldn't heal, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She decided to dig deeper. Emily spent the next several days combing through every bit of information she could find. She returned to the second phone, scouring every message, every call log. She was careful, methodical, everything had to be perfect. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she needed something, anything, that would give her clarity. Slowly, the picture of James's double life began to take shape. He had been traveling to Columbus, Ohio, for years, ostensibly for business, but the patterns were unmistakable. His frequent absences lined up with the dates Jennifer had posted about her family on social media. Emily even traced some of the charges on their shared credit cards to restaurants and hotels in Columbus, places James had never mentioned during their conversations. But it wasn't just the financial records that disturbed her, it was the emotional toll that it was taking. She couldn't stop herself from comparing her life with Jennifer's. She saw the photos of the happy family, Jennifer, the children, and James, laughing at birthday parties, playing at parks, attending family outings. It was everything Emily had wanted. It was everything she thought she had with James. But it was all a lie. The worst part, Emily realized, was the fact that James hadn't just been keeping secrets from her, he had been living a lie. He had been lying to Jennifer, too. The messages between James and Jennifer painted a picture of a man who had created an elaborate story, a web of deceit that intertwined their lives in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. Jennifer seemed blissfully unaware of the full extent of the deception, believing that James was a devoted father and partner. Emily's heart broke as she read through the texts, the love, the care, the shared moments that Emily had never been part of. As the investigation continued, the weight of the situation grew heavier. Emily started to feel like she was suffocating under the pressure of it all. Her mind was spinning in circles, constantly jumping from one realization to the next, piecing together the fragments of her shattered life. She found herself questioning everything. How long had James been seeing Jennifer? Had he ever really loved her? Or had she been nothing more than a convenient partner, a placeholder in his perfect little world? And what about the children? Had James ever truly wanted them with Emily, or had they simply been another part of the facade he had created? In the midst of the emotional chaos, Emily couldn't ignore the mounting fear that something worse was coming. She had started to feel like she was walking a tightrope, with nothing but the abyss below her. The more she uncovered, the more her anxiety grew. James had a second family, but now she wondered if there was more to the story. Was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Was this just about cheating, or was there something far more sinister at play? Emily's mind raced with all the possible scenarios, each one more horrifying than the last. What if James had been leading a life of crime? What if the money he had been spending on Jennifer and the children came from illegal sources? What if there were more secrets, things even more damning than infidelity? She couldn't do this alone. Emily needed help. She wasn't sure who she could trust, but she knew that if she was going to get to the bottom of this, she couldn't keep it all inside. The thought of confiding in anyone, though, felt almost impossible. She wasn't ready to face the full truth. Not yet. The emotional toll of the investigation was starting to take a serious toll on Emily's well-being. She had lost weight, her eyes were constantly bloodshot from lack of sleep, and the anxiety was so thick that it felt like it was suffocating her. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life around, had shattered everything in a single moment. It wasn't until one night, when Emily found herself sitting alone in their living room, staring at the photo of James with Jennifer's children, that she made her decision. She couldn't let it go any longer. She had to confront him, no matter the consequences. Emily didn't know how it would end, but she knew that keeping it all inside would destroy her. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone. It was time to take the next step. The days after Emily's discovery felt like they were stretching into eternity. Each hour that passed only deepened the pit in her stomach, but it also steeled her resolve. She could no longer live with the weight of the secrets hanging over her, and as much as she feared the confrontation, she knew it was time to face James. There was no turning back now. She had uncovered the truth, and she had to hold him accountable. No more running from the reality of their life together, the reality of his lies. She would no longer pretend that things were fine when they were far from it. It was a Friday evening in early March, the kind of evening where the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow through their living room windows. Emily sat on the couch, staring at her phone, the blinking cursor on the screen as her fingers hovered over the screen. She had been rehearsing the words she would say to James for days, but the right ones never seemed to come. How could she begin? How could she put into words the betrayal she felt, the years of deceit, the lies that had festered beneath their perfect life? She couldn't. James would be home any minute now, after a long business trip in Los Angeles. The clock on the wall ticked louder with each passing second. Emily took a shaky breath and wiped her hands on her jeans. She needed answers. She needed the truth from him. But most of all, she needed closure. She had tried to convince herself that everything would somehow resolve itself, that the anger and pain would subside, but they hadn't. They only grew, fed by the discovery she'd made, and now the moment of reckoning was upon her. The door creaked open, and she heard James's familiar footsteps echo down the hallway. Emily's heart raced in her chest, but she steadied herself. This was it. The moment when everything would change. "Hey, Em," James called out from the entryway, his voice casual, even cheerful, as though nothing was wrong. But there was an undercurrent there, a slight edge to his tone that Emily couldn't ignore. His footsteps faltered for a second when he saw her sitting in the living room, her face unreadable. "Hey, James," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. She stood up, her legs feeling like they were made of rubber. She wasn't sure if she could do this, but she had no choice. The truth had to come out. James raised an eyebrow as he stepped closer, sensing that something was wrong. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone now more cautious. "You're not acting like yourself." Emily took a deep breath, the weight of everything she had discovered crashing down on her once more. She had to be strong. She couldn't let him twist this, couldn't let him lie his way out of it again. This time, she would control the conversation. "I know," Emily said, her voice steadying, "about Jennifer. And the kids. I know everything, James." James froze in his tracks, his face draining of color as the words sank in. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the silence between them hanging like a thick fog. His eyes darted to the coffee table, where she had placed the photos and the second phone, and his face shifted from shock to panic. Emily saw the way his shoulders tightened, how his jaw clenched. How did you?" James stammered, but Emily didn't let him finish. "No more lies, James," she interrupted, her voice rising, the floodgates of emotion opening. "I found the second phone. I found the messages between you and her. I saw the photos. I saw the cards, Father's Day cards with your name on them. I know about your second family. And I know you've been lying to me for years." James took a step back, visibly shaken, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for the right words. Emily could see the shift in his demeanor, from a man who had been in control of his double life to someone suddenly caught in a lie too big to escape. His usual calm was gone, replaced with a look of desperation. I can explain," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He moved toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture, as if trying to soothe her. Listen, it's not what you think. I never meant for this to happen. I swear. It's not. Not what I think." Emily's voice shook with anger now. "You've been living another life, James. You've been lying to me for years. How could you? How could you do this to me, to us?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," James said quickly, his voice now defensive. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly as he tried to organize his thoughts. It got out of control. I never planned for it to happen like this. I thought I could handle both lives, but then everything got so tangled. I didn't want to lose you, Em. I love you, I do. But I also loved her. I didn't know what to do." Emily's breath hitched in her throat, and the words felt like they were suffocating her. "You loved her," she repeated, disbelief flashing across her face. "What about me? What about our marriage? Was that a lie too?" "No. No, Emily, I love you," James pleaded, his voice rising with panic. "But I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I thought I could keep it all under control. I thought I could make it work. But I failed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The apology, the desperation in his voice, felt hollow. Emily had spent years trusting this man, loving him, and now she realized that every smile, every kiss, every shared dream had been built on a foundation of lies. The pain was too much to bear, and for a moment, all she could do was stand there, silent and numb. The man she had loved, had believed in, was nothing more than a stranger to her now. "I don't know who you are anymore, James," Emily whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I thought I knew you. But I don't. You've been lying to me, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." James looked at her with such a mixture of guilt and sorrow that it almost felt like he was pleading for her to understand. "I never meant to hurt you. I wanted us to have everything we planned. I love you, Em. Please, don't walk away from me." But Emily wasn't sure if she could walk back into that life. Everything had changed. And as much as it tore her apart, she knew she couldn't keep living in this web of lies. The truth was too devastating. "I need time," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I need space. I don't know if I can do this anymore, James. I don't know if I can trust you again." As James stood there, helpless, Emily felt the weight of everything she had uncovered, the years of deception, the broken trust, the shattered dreams, pressing down on her. She knew her life with James would never be the same. The world she had known, the love she had believed in, had crumbled, and she had no idea how, or if, it could ever be rebuilt. With a final glance at James, Emily turned and walked out of the room, leaving him behind, standing in the wreckage of the life they had once shared. The days following the confrontation with James were a blur. Emily's heartache was as overwhelming as the silence that now filled their home. The once warm and lively space where they had shared so many memories now felt like a prison, cold and suffocating. The sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen was the only thing that broke the stillness. James had left, just like that, disappearing without a word. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with was suddenly gone, leaving behind a shattered reality and a mountain of unanswered questions. Emily tried to hold it together, but it felt like she was drowning in the chaos that James had left in his wake. Every moment was a battle. The pain of betrayal seemed to suffocate her, making it difficult to think clearly, to function. The first few days were the worst. She couldn't bring herself to call anyone, to tell her friends or family what had happened. She just existed. Hours blurred together as she moved through the motions of daily life, but it felt as though everything had lost its meaning. James's absence was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, and Emily had no idea how to begin healing. She kept expecting him to return, for him to walk through the door, apologetic, begging for forgiveness. She kept thinking that maybe it had all been a mistake, a horrible misunderstanding. But as the days stretched into weeks, Emily began to realize that James was not coming back. He had left, and the truth he had been hiding from her for years was now fully exposed. Her thoughts were consumed with questions that didn't have answers. Where had he gone? Why hadn't he come back to face her? What was he hiding? She had seen the evidence of his double life, but there was still so much she didn't understand. The realization hit her hard: the man she had married had kept more secrets than she could have ever imagined. And now, she had to unravel those secrets. Emily didn't know where to start, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something was wrong. James's sudden disappearance wasn't just a result of the confrontation, they both knew it wasn't that simple. There was more to his absence than just a man fleeing from his mistakes. It didn't make sense. She felt it in her gut: something darker was at play. Unable to ignore the nagging suspicion anymore, Emily took the first step to find out the truth. She reached out to the one person she thought might know where James had gone, his younger sister, Megan Richardson. Megan had always been close to James, and Emily had confided in her during the earlier years of their marriage. Megan was the person Emily trusted the most, outside of James, of course. They met for coffee at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. As Emily sat across from Megan, the weight of everything she had discovered and everything she still needed to know pressed down on her. Megan's face was pale, her eyes wide with concern. She knew something was wrong. Emily could see it in the way she fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I haven't heard from James," Megan admitted, her voice trembling. I don't know where he is, Emily. He hasn't returned my calls, hasn't replied to any of my messages. This isn't like him." Emily's stomach twisted. "I need to know where he is, Megan. Something's not right. He didn't just leave because of the argument. There's more to this. I need to understand what he's hiding." Megan swallowed hard, glancing nervously over her shoulder as though checking to see if anyone could hear them. "There's been talk," she whispered, lowering her voice. "I don't know all the details, but there were some things James was involved in that he never told me about. Things I think he was trying to keep hidden, even from me." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. Financial problems? The sense of dread in the pit of her stomach grew heavier. She had already uncovered so many lies, but now there was something even darker lurking beneath the surface. Was James involved in something criminal? Was he running from something or someone? Megan paused before continuing, her voice tight with fear. "I've heard rumors that James was involved in some sort of business dealings. People he was meeting with, clients who never seemed to check out. And I know this sounds crazy, but I heard his name come up in a conversation once, something about fraud." Emily felt her world tilt. Fraud? The word echoed in her mind like a loud, sharp warning bell. Had James been hiding not just a second family but something much worse? Emily wasn't sure, but she knew she couldn't sit idly by. She needed to know more, to uncover the full extent of his double life. With Megan's cryptic words still fresh in her mind, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She began digging into James's financial records, using their joint accounts and credit card statements. As she combed through the pages and receipts, her stomach churned with every new discovery. Unexplained charges to companies she didn't recognize, large sums of money transferred to offshore accounts, strange withdrawals at odd hours, everything pointed to one conclusion. James hadn't just been leading a double life, he had been living a triple life, one that included a financial web of lies, deceit, and potential criminal activity. With a growing sense of urgency, Emily reached out to the police, unsure of what to expect. Detective Michael Lawson, a veteran investigator known for his work on complex cases, was assigned to look into James's disappearance. At first, the case seemed like just another missing persons report, but as Detective Lawson delved deeper into James's financial activities, the situation quickly escalated. James's financial records are problematic, Detective Lawson told Emily during their first meeting. "There's a lot of irregular activity here. And I think it goes beyond just a few missed payments. This could be part of a larger scheme. We've been tracking some of these accounts, and they've shown up in connection with a number of ongoing investigations into fraudulent business dealings." Emily's heart raced. This wasn't just about James and his secret family anymore. This was serious. The man she had married was involved in something far more dangerous than infidelity, and she was now deep in a tangled web of lies, deceit, and criminal activity. She had no idea where it would lead, but she knew one thing for sure: her life, her reality, had been upended. Everything was about to change. As the investigation into James's disappearance expanded, so did the search for answers. Detective Lawson and his team began to uncover connections between James and shady figures, and soon, the entire scope of his double life came into view. Emily had thought that uncovering the truth about his affair would be the hardest part, but now she realized that the hardest part was just beginning. The investigation was only getting started, and Emily couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. What was James hiding? What other secrets would be uncovered as the investigation progressed? The deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. And Emily was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The days stretched into weeks, and the more Emily uncovered, the more the weight of the situation crushed her. What she had once thought was a betrayal of love had evolved into something darker, a sprawling web of lies, deceit, and now, a deepening criminal investigation. James was still missing, his disappearance more unsettling by the day. His financial records, traced by Detective Lawson and his team, revealed a pattern of fraudulent business deals, illicit accounts, and connections to dangerous individuals. The man Emily had once called her husband was a complete stranger, a man capable of living multiple lies at once, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something even darker lurking beneath the surface. She hadn't spoken to him since the night of their confrontation. Emily tried to hold on to hope that he would come back, that he would finally face her and explain everything, but as the days went on, that hope began to fade. She couldn't deny the gnawing feeling in her gut, something wasn't right, and she could feel herself spiraling deeper into uncertainty. The walls of her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a suffocating cage. The anger, the hurt, the confusion had consumed her, leaving her unable to focus on anything but James's absence and the haunting questions it left behind. But it was a phone call in the middle of the night that would send everything crashing down. The call came at 2:30 a.m., an unfamiliar number flashing on her screen. Emily's pulse quickened as she answered, her voice trembling. "Hello?" "Emily," a rough voice said on the other end. "It's James. I need to see you. We need to talk. I can explain everything." Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected this moment, had hoped for it, but now, hearing his voice, she wasn't sure if she was prepared for what came next. "James," she whispered, her heart racing. "Where are you?" There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice strained. "I'm not safe here, Em. You need to meet me. It's the only way I can explain. I'll be waiting for you. Don't tell anyone. It's dangerous." The call ended abruptly, leaving Emily in a haze of shock. She didn't know what to do. The last time she had seen James, he had been running away from the wreckage of their marriage, and now he was asking her to meet him in secret. The confusion, the fear, and the temptation to find answers collided within her. Could she trust him? Should she trust him? Despite everything, Emily couldn't ignore the urge to get to the bottom of it. Her head swirled with unanswered questions, with thoughts of betrayal and confusion, but she knew she needed to know the truth. She couldn't keep living in the dark, haunted by the man she had loved and the destruction he had left behind. With a deep breath, she made her decision. She would go. Emily drove to the abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, the place James had mentioned on the phone. It was a rundown building, the kind of place where forgotten things were left to rot. As she pulled into the parking lot, the sound of gravel crunching under her tires echoed in the empty night. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she glanced around, a feeling of dread settling in her chest. It was dark, eerily silent, and the further she drove into the lot, the more her sense of unease deepened. She parked near the entrance, her eyes darting nervously around. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the factory doors, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had no idea what she was walking into. Was James really here? Was he in danger, or was this just another trick to manipulate her? The air felt cold and still as Emily approached the building. She heard a sound behind her, footsteps, slow and deliberate, and turned around. From the shadows emerged James, looking nothing like the man she had once known. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his clothes were ragged. The polished businessman she had married was now a stranger, a broken version of the man she had once loved. "James," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is this? What's going on?" James looked at her, his face twisted in a mixture of guilt and fear. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said, his voice raw. "I never meant for it to get this far." Emily took a step forward, but something in James's eyes made her pause. There was a wildness there, a desperation that made her heart pound in her chest. "I'm in too deep, Em," James continued, his voice shaking. "I've done things I can't undo. People are after me. I've been running, hiding. I don't know what to do anymore." The words he spoke were incoherent, each one more erratic than the last. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The man she had once trusted, the man she had built a life with, was unraveling before her eyes. The illusion of control he had once maintained was gone, replaced by panic and paranoia. "James, what's going on?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "What have you done? What are you hiding from?" "I'm sorry, Em. I'm so sorry. His voice was filled with anguish. I tried to keep it all separate. I didn't want you to find out. I didn't want to destroy everything. But now, it's too late. Suddenly, a sound pierced the night, sirens, distant at first, but growing closer. James's eyes widened in fear, and without warning, he turned and bolted toward the back of the factory. I can't go back. I can't, he shouted, his voice frantic. Emily stood frozen, her mind racing. What was happening? Was he running from the police? Was he truly in danger, or was this just another of his lies? Before she could react, the sound of police vehicles echoed through the parking lot, and within seconds, officers surrounded the factory. The flashing lights illuminated the darkness, casting long shadows on the ground. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that whatever was happening, it was spiraling out of control. James reached the back door, but before he could escape, the officers converged on him. He turned, his eyes wide with terror, and in that moment, Emily saw something she hadn't noticed before, a gun, clutched tightly in his hand. He was desperate, trapped, and there was no way out. James, don't! Emily shouted, rushing toward him. Please, put it down. But it was too late. In a flash of motion, James raised the gun to his head. The officers shouted, but before anyone could react, the sound of a gunshot rang out through the night. Emily froze, her body trembling, as James collapsed to the ground. The world seemed to stop. Time stretched, and for a moment, nothing existed but the ringing in her ears and the heavy silence that followed. James was gone. The man she had once loved, the man who had shattered her world, had ended his life in a final, tragic act. The aftermath of James's death was a whirlwind of police investigations, media coverage, and unanswered questions. As the truth about his criminal activities unfolded, Emily's life was forever changed. She was left with the pieces of a life she had once believed in, now nothing more than shattered remnants. And as the years passed, the trauma of that night lingered, a dark shadow hanging over everything she had once hoped for. The consequences of James's lies, the lives destroyed, the secrets uncovered, would haunt Emily for the rest of her life. The events that unfolded after James's tragic death were a blur to Emily. The weeks that followed were filled with police interviews, media attention, and endless questions. The truth about James's double life, his affair with Jennifer, his criminal activities, and the financial fraud he had been running, began to surface in pieces. Emily had always believed in their life together, in their shared dreams, but now it seemed like all of it had been a carefully constructed facade. The man she had married, the man she had loved, was nothing more than a stranger wearing a mask. And as the full extent of his deceit was revealed, Emily was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. The authorities closed their investigation into James's disappearance and subsequent death, but for Emily, the journey was far from over. The shock of his actions had left a scar that would never fully heal. The betrayal she had experienced, the years of trust she had placed in him, felt like a lie that had been buried deep within the foundation of their marriage. In the months that followed, Emily tried to rebuild her life. She moved to a new apartment, away from the house they had shared, and began therapy to help her navigate the overwhelming feelings of grief, anger, and confusion that had consumed her. She struggled to trust again, and the loneliness of living without James was a constant reminder of the painful reality she had faced. The pain didn't go away easily, it never really would. But with time, Emily began to understand the importance of closure. She had faced the truth, as difficult and devastating as it was, and that was the first step toward healing. Yet, as Emily tried to move forward, she couldn't help but wonder, how could James have let things get so out of control? Why had he chosen to live this double life? What had driven him to such extreme measures? She had spent so many years trying to piece together the truth, and in the end, she realized that there were no easy answers. Sometimes, People's actions are driven by a complex web of emotions, desires, and fears, factors that are often hidden even from the people closest to them. It was a painful lesson to learn, but one that Emily would carry with her for the rest of her life. As time passed, Emily began to focus on the future. She worked on healing herself, rediscovering her passions, and slowly rebuilding her sense of self-worth. The lessons from her marriage, about trust, betrayal, and the importance of self-respect, became a guiding force in her life. She knew that, despite everything, she could never let the darkness of the past control her future. The tragedy of James's life and death would never be erased, but Emily had learned to move forward, to live her life on her own terms, free from the lies that had once bound her. And while the pain would always be a part of her, Emily also realized that she had the power to choose how she responded to it. She chose to live with integrity, to face the truth, and to build a life that reflected her values of honesty, trust, and self-respect. The experience had been harrowing, but it had made her stronger. She now understood the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships and the need to trust her instincts. Though the scars would remain, Emily had learned to navigate the complexities of life, understanding that growth often comes from the most painful experiences. She had lost something irreplaceable, but in return, she had gained a deeper understanding of herself, and of the kind of life she wanted to build moving forward. As Emily's journey continues, so does the exploration of the themes of trust, betrayal, and self-discovery. The story isn't just about the devastation of a broken marriage, it's also about resilience, learning from hardship, and the strength it takes to rebuild after everything falls apart. Emily's choice to face the truth, no matter how painful, ultimately led her to reclaim her power and move toward a brighter future. What do you think about Emily's story? How would you have handled the situation if you were in her shoes? Do you believe trust can ever truly be rebuilt after betrayal? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your perspective. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about resilience and human emotions. Your support means everything to us.